My name is Myke Hideous. I'm an artist, a photographer, and an author. In 1988, I created a rock band called the EMPIRE HIDEOUS, and I released several albums and performed around the country. This is a variety podcast in which Professor Z and I extract details from interesting daily headlines to offer our listeners the inevitable truth. You're listening to Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous. That's me. Today is the 4th of March, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is the 102nd anniversary of the day Nosferatu was released. The black and white silent film was released back in 1922. Big day, big event for me. I'm a huge fan of that movie. In any event, I just wanted to make a few, nothing long, but just make a little announcement here. For those of you who are just starting to listen to this show, which is going to be episode 10, which goes to show you we've only done 9 episodes prior. And this is a variety show. This is a show that we just started, Professor Z and I. And we are not, we're trying to get more subjects, but we are not prone to talking about just politics. We do at times, and that's because what's happening in the world is, especially in the country, is extremely important. And in my opinion, as well as Professor Z, we feel it's important to talk about these issues. Now, some of you may know that my past as a politically correct left-wing Democrat, liberal on that topic. I don't want to push that issue too much. I don't want people to get frightened on what we talk about on this show. So I'm going to leave it short at that and just tell you it's a variety show, and we're trying to bring you more topics in various subject matter. On that note, I first want to introduce my co-host, producer, engineer, partner in crime, and colleague, Professor Z.
Hello, listeners. How are you all doing tonight?
That
I
was
hope well, at the very least.
That was an amazing come-in, Professor. Very, very
I did my
stimulating.
best. I actually wrote that down, so,
Good. You wrote that.
I wrote it. I wanted to be sure I didn't stumble, Hey.
Okay.
So I am proud to be a part of the program, Myke, and looking forward to tonight's interview.
Good. So, yes, we are this is our second interview since we have begun Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous. So the man that we are about to interview tonight, I've known him since around, I think it was 93 when we actually met. In fact, as a matter of fact, the person that we are going to interview, our guest, him and I have had a debate on this, on when we actually met, because we've both written books. And in his book, he has a different date and time on when we met. And in my book, I have a different date and time on when we met. Doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, we are very good friends. I've known him for years. He was at one point around 95, 96. He was the manager of my band Empire Hideous, helped me out in promoting shows and booking gigs and that sort of thing. Furthermore, he is an amazing artist. And by that, I mean painting, drawing, but mostly painting in oils on canvas. And he does images of all kinds of rock stars and famous people and people of status. that aside, he is also an author, which is what we're going to be talking to him about tonight. In addition, he is also a retired physician in the orthopedic field, meaning he worked on bones and stuff like that. So his hands are quite unique. They from the most delicate art to the sawing of bone. That's who this man is. So, without further ado, I want to introduce a man to you who is not to be confused with the jazz player, the jazz musician, but this man's name is Dr. John, and he is a personal friend of mine. And again, not to be confused with Dr. John, the jazz musician. But here we go, Dr. John. Come on in, sir.
Greetings, Myke, and everybody else involved here. My moniker is Dr. John, spelled out Doktor, whereas the Dr. John, who's the Zydeco jazz musician, he used Dr. John.
Doctor.
So
Right.
anyhow, I made it a point to spell it out in the sort of the German spelling, Doktor John.
Doctor.
Anyhow, that's me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with me and Professor.
I'm honored. I'm honored to be.
Welcome to the show, Doctor. Yes, it's great to have you here.
Professor, thank you for your introduction.
Yeah, I got all kinds of people. I got a professor, I got a doctor, and then of course there's me, the Lord Hideous. So anyway, so Doc, let's start from the beginning here. Now, you were many years ago, back in the, I believe, 70s and 80s, you were a physician. And I'm not going to go too deeply into this subject, but I want to start by going from section to section of your life to get to where we are now. So you started out as a physician in the orthopedic field. What inspired you to become a doctor? Why did you want to become a doctor?
I think I was fortunate when I went to high school. I went to St. Peter's Prep High School, and they had 3 tracks for, it's a very selective school, very
Where was
competitive.
that, Jersey City?
In Jersey City. Very hard to get into. And in those days, expensive, $400 a year.
Whoa.
Now they're like $40,000 a year.
Oh my God.
But anyhow, don't forget, that was in the 50s and 60s. I went to school in the 60s. They had 3 tracks that you could take, specialized tracks in the 4-year high school program. And one was a so-called academic track, which was broad, all academic fields, math, history, English, a foreign language, and so on. The next track was for science, the science honors program. And then the third track was Greek. So you would have all your academic stuff, but you would do Greek and a foreign language like French or German. I think they took French. Well, I was in the middle one of them. I was in the science honors program, and I developed a fascination for science. I really came to love science. I just loved contemplating the truths that were revealed by science. So when I graduated, I went to college, and that was a turbulent, like for a lot of people in that age group, 17, 18 years old, graduating high school. It was a turbulent time in my life, and I wasn't doing that great socially. And I started college planning to major in psychology. And I had the good fortune and maybe the wisdom to start off my first course, not in psychology, but in biology. And, my advisor said, "Why are you doing that? I thought you were going to be a psych major." I said, "Well, how am I going to be a psychologist if I don't know the biology of the human being and of the human brain?" So he said, "Well, okay, but you're going to have to catch up on your psychology later." I said, I'll catch up. Anyhow, I took biology. I loved it. I had never had biology at St. Peter's Prep. In those days, Catholic schools were shying away from biology because they didn't want you to get involved in Darwin and evolution.
Wow.
Now, I'm talking about the 50s and 60s.
That's amazing.
I entered in 1959. So I graduated in 64, and St. Peter's Prep, as competitive and as good a school as it was, and I learned a tremendous amount there. Uh, but they taught chemistry, they taught physics, they taught math, but they didn't teach biology.
It's hard to
So
believe that was only like
yeah,
60 to 70 years ago.
yeah. So when I entered biology at my college, Rutgers, I was just blown away. I said, "Wow, this is what really life is about. This is what makes things work. This is what makes
Literally.
humans function and all the rest of the living world."
Literally, yeah.
So that just went on, and so then I would take courses on biology alongside my psychology major courses. So I wound up with sort of a double major. Now I was doing very well in every biology course I took. I aced. I just loved it so much. I couldn't stop studying it. And one of my uncles said to my mother at the time, "Is your son going to be a psychologist?" So she says, "Well, he's majoring in that." And he said, "When you do very well in biology, probably the right thing to do is pre-med." And I just took that. I took that as advice, and when upon toward graduation, I applied to medical school, and I was accepted at the New Jersey Medical College, which is now Rutgers. It has undergone name changes since I graduated in 1968. It has undergone name changes. It was New Jersey College of Medicine. Actually, it was first Seton Hall, then it was New Jersey College of Medicine, then Robert Wood Johnson, and finally, it's now Rutgers, a large, sprawling medical school that takes in nursing and physical therapy and so many other things. Well, anyhow, that's how I got to be a physician.
That's amazing. And now you mentioned that you were going to go into psychology. Did you ever think that psychology was something that you'd rather have gotten into instead of orthopedic surgery?
Interesting. You should say that. When I did go to medical school, my intention was to become a psychiatrist. But again, I was when I took surgery in my third year of medical school, because you don't take surgery, until the upper grades of medical schools. First and second years are on sciences. But in the third year of medical school, I studied and participated in surgery. And once again, I fell in love with this new subject matter: surgery, anatomy of the human body, and remedies for diseases and injuries.
So
Surgical
let me
remedies.
ask you this: having been how long were you a surgeon? How many years?
I practiced orthopedic surgery for 40 years as an orthopedic surgeon. I studied it for 4 years before, but I actually practiced as a practicing orthopedic surgeon for 40 and a half years, 40 years and 6 months.
Having said that, and the fact that you were in that for 40 plus years, and I've always wanted to ask this question: do you feel that in order for a person to be a surgeon, you have to have a certain mindset? In other words, if you're going to cut a body open, or in your case, how you used to deal with people who had broken limbs, compound fractures, putting pins in and replacing hips, did that bother you at first? Like, did you have a problem seeing blood and guts?
Well, I have sort of mixed feelings on that. When I always found that when I was involved with my hands in the body, where there's a cadaver that I was dissecting for study, or an injured person, or a person whose organs I had to deal with,
Stuff back
it
in.
didn't bother me. It didn't bother me.
And why is that?
But to watch to this day, I cover my eyes. Honestly, I cover my eyes when I see gory horror movies.
Isn't that funny?
Theatrical blood, I can't stand the sight of theatrical blood. but bring me a half amputated leg, and I can play with it, and I'll tell you a story real quick.
Please.
One time I came home from surgery, and my wife we were sitting across a dinner table from each other, and she noticed something on my ear, and she kind of reached up and picked at my ear. Now, understand that during surgery, you wear a mask. You sometimes wear uh, a clear plastic face guard above the mask. You wear a hat, but your ears are often exposed.
All right.
So, what do you think she picked off of my ear? She
Another
picked off
ear.
a little chunk of bone, that was stuck there by the dried blood.
Oh,
So while I was sawing, the saw kicked up some sawdust, which happened to be bone and with blood on it, and stuck to my ear.
wow.
So yeah, she's a doctor too, so it didn't bother her too much. But she did go wash her hands afterwards and implored me, please go wash your ear.
Go wash your ear.
But anyhow,
That's a great
no.
story.
To answer your overall question, I think it's not for everybody.
Obviously.
But it's not that hard when you're involved doing it. It's really not repulsive. When you have a job to do, when you're involved, to just watch may not be that pleasant and that bearable.
Mm.
But if you're going to actually, so I started off as a medical student and so on, helping professional surgeons, practicing surgeons, holding, cutting the knots when they would tie a knot, cutting this suture material and holding the body part with a retractor so that they could get access to it. And from that point on, it never really bothered me. I did see some medical or pre-medical students who changed their direction. They did not like to see the horrors of injury and illness and the human
Well,
body exposed.
it's interesting how you describe it and how you mention that there is a certain mental frame of mind that you have to have in order to deal with certain circumstances like that. For me, I can watch any horror movie. I can watch any, uh, just about any footage of a bot, like a human person that has been in an accident or something to that extent. Movies don't bother me, and the footage doesn't bother me. However, I have noticed that there are certain limitations. Like if I see a body that's been absolutely massacred to the point of not being recognizable, that can sometimes disturb me. And I think that's because I still recognize mortality, and I guess you could say that just not seeing a human completely torn apart, because that's when it changes a person from being alive and human and talking to you almost to being subhuman.
Yeah, that I could see how at that degree of damage, it's disturbing to anyone.
Yeah. Okay. I
Yeah.
just I didn't know if I was a little, different than most people or what, but I like I said, I can watch a horror movie. I can watch surgical films. I mean, for a fact that when Empire Hideous used to play, we used to have the television on stage playing all that carnage of accidents and
Yeah,
surgery
I
and
remember.
people getting electrocuted and stuff.
I
So
remember.
none of that bothered me. None of that bothered me. It's seeing people that eh, you are just completely taken apart that kind of would bother me. All that aside. So
Okay.
now we've talked about your medical past, and as I've said before, folks, he is retired. But you're also an artist. You've been painting and drawing for decades. Now, were you an artist before you were a surgeon?
Yes, it came to me very naturally. I've been drawing and painting stuff since I was like 4 years old. It
Wow.
just came to me very naturally. Again, a little story. My family got one of the earliest televisions in Jersey City. Reason was my grandfather owned a tavern, and he had to have one of the earliest televisions, little TV like this, for his customers, his patrons, to watch the boxing matches. on a little black and white TV like that. And so he got one for us. And it was very early television. It was only about 10 inches. And I was 3 years old. And so my parents had this oil-filled lens that was mounted to the television by some type of a clamp system. And I used to watch John Nagy learn to draw. John Nagy, his name is spelled Gnagy. John, Jon, Nagy, learned to draw. And he used to do drawings with charcoals. Now, of course, I'm 3 years old, and I had no idea whatsoever what charcoals were. So my father was a printer, and he would come home from work every so often with a little stack of drawing paper, or actually paper for printing
Like regular
pamphlets
bond
or
paper.
whatever. And, here, something to amuse you to play with. So I used to lie on my stomach with a pencil and the stack of paper that my father had brought home from the print shop and try to keep up with John Nagy. I'm 3 years old now. You could imagine how
3 years
frustrating.
old, my gosh.
But you can imagine how frustrating it was because he was going so fast. And although I apparently had some natural inclination to draw, I would be crying over not being able to keep up with him when he would be drawing a dog, a Dalmatian with spots and everything. So, and you know what? If you pulled on that magnifying lens, pulled it away from the TV, it made it even bigger. Of course, you defeated the purpose because then you'd only have part of the screen blown way up,
Right.
and you didn't see the periphery. Anyhow, I stood up one time, and I guess I was still only three and a half, and I pulled on that lens, and I pulled it off its attachment to the TV, and it fell on top of me, and it broke, and the oil spilled all over me and on the floor. Well, I thought my parents were going to come out and scream, at me for doing it. They were worried that I was hurt. And I always remember that event in my very early childhood. They're cleaning up the oil and saying, "No, it's okay, Johnny. It's okay. It's all right. Don't worry about it." And I was upset that I had. Anyhow, those are my early TV experiences. That'd be like 1949.
Okay. And so you started out at a very at like practically preschool age,
Yeah.
drawing.
Mhm.
When would you say you really started getting more serious with art and taking it to a different level?
Yeah, I think it was around 1986. I bought some canvases and and some acrylic paints, and I was sort of exiled in the basement of my home at the time because the wife and I were not getting along that well. And I would go down the basement and paint, and I would paint basement scenes. A junction box with cables coming out of it,
Right.
a carpenter's saw hanging,
Right.
an old radio, an old.
I almost want to say I've seen some of these images that you've drawn or painted from the past. You've got
Yes, they're
some of
from
them still,
right.
right?
And those were the basement paintings,
Right.
wood and old radios or
Right.
cameras.
I remember seeing these images that you've done. So, all right. So having said
That was
that,
86. That's when I started really painting
okay.
on canvas.
So you started getting more serious in '86, and so I'm going to move now a little bit more further to the '90s, and around '93, '94, about '93, you and I met. So, for those of you who are interested, in a nutshell, we met through an Empire Hideous gig in which Dr. John had attended the show with his son, whose name is also John. And it was Doc's son, John, who brought him to the show to see the band, the Empire Hideous. And I think you had said to me that you had gone to like 2 or 3 shows and you weren't very impressed with our band until a final gig we played at CBGB's when we opened up for Night of Misanthropy. Right? Am I right so far?
That's well, I was impressed from the beginning, but you're right, not as impressed as I was when I attended that night of misanthropy. Don't forget, CBGB's was like, as the audience, you were really up close and personal with the band.
Mm.
You know, you're right there at the stage, and the power of Empire Hideous, the everything about it, the performance, the live performance was so elaborate and so well staged, but the music could really be appreciated differently than from, say, a top tier at the bank looking down on the band from up in the top tier. Well, yeah, the music gets a little faded by the time it reaches the upper, which is where I was standing. And, you know, you don't get the effect of the performance quite as well as you would at CBGB's.
Okay.
So that night of misanthropy, I was completely blown away. It was like a religious conversion. I
Nice.
became the number one fan of Empire Hideous on that date.
Right. Now, for those of you who are listening, what Doc is talking about when he says Night of Misanthropy. Night of Misanthropy used to be an event run by a guy named Brian Dahl, who was from a band called Loretta's Doll, who had a production company called Suffering Clown Productions. Anyway, it was Brian who got me my first gig at CBGB's for his event called A Night of Misanthropy. And that, I'm almost positive, was 1993, because I remember speaking to him on the phone while I was living at my apartment in Bloomfield. So this is not about me. Nevertheless, that's how Doc and I met. As time went by, we became closer. He and I worked together he helped me out with my band, and we just became very good friends. Now, tick tock, time goes by. I'm not going to give away everything, so I'm going to get to the point of the book, all right, which was released, last year, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So the name of the book, ladies and gentlemen, is called Life in the New Dark Age. Okay? And it is available on Amazon, right?
Yes, it is.
Is there any other
Yeah, I think Barnes and Noble. It's on you can order it over Barnes and Noble as well. Yeah.
Okay. So the book that Doc wrote, well, why don't you explain to let's start with what inspired you to write this book?
Well, you know, starting with that milestone performance at Night of Misanthropy, I then determined that I was going to immerse myself in the goth industrial music culture. I was going to learn about it, and I was going to actually become part of it. I decided I was going to immerse myself in it almost as deeply as I could within the limits of being a professional physician. You know, only with whatever time was left over from my professional life, I was going to spend as an inhabitant of the goth scene. And in so doing, I found every opportunity to enter the next stage, another portal, deeper and deeper into the scene. Managing your band, the Empire Hideous, was one portal that led me into more the independent music, goth rock scene. Um, another area that brought me deeply into it was when I took over writing for the Aquarian, using your previous column with the Aquarian as a template for me to follow, covering the goings on in the goth scene, mainly in New York.
Okay, well, let me stop you right there. Hold that thought. Now, for those of you who are listening, Doc mentioned the Aquarian Weekly. Now, the Aquarian Weekly was a weekly arts and entertainment newspaper that I initially worked for as a journalist and a salesperson. And I would get various people to contribute their writing abilities whether it was a CD review, an interview, a show review, and they would put it in my column, which would come out once a month. And my column was, the first column was Zone X24, and then it became Area 13. In any event, Doc ended up submitting quite a few articles that he wrote for of shows or CDs that he would put in my column. When I left, Doc continued to work there. So I just wanted to explain that. Doc, you may continue.
So it became such a regular thing for me, and it was so well received by the readership of the Aquarian. I made it a regular monthly column. So every 4 issues, I had a column, and I called it New Dark Age, referring to the culture and the aesthetics of the goth scene, or as I, by extension, the goth industrial scene, which I viewed as a sort of a new age of different values and darker, more, what would you say, a
Darker expressions and
more
emotions.
cynical, more cynical and more modernist look on the world that I considered a new dark age.
Like apocalyptic almost, maybe?
Right. Maybe an apocalyptic, or post-apocalyptic world that seemed to be, well, anyhow, to complete the thought, I was in it so long that, since you brought this up as by way of the book, I decided when the COVID lockdowns occurred in 2020, and it seemed that my beloved goth scene was going to die because all the clubs were
no
closed.
pun intended.
Yeah, and everything was, the transportation was cut off, all of the clubs were shut, and I said, if this is the end, I want to document the scene that I knew from, as you say, the early 90s, 1993, up until 2020, what had transpired. I wanted to chronicle it for history, for when people look back and they say, well, what was that about? Like, say, do you know much about the age, the jazz age of the flappers in the 1920s? There were books about it, and there were movies and stuff, but
sure,
I was afraid that there would be nothing that covered the goth scene from the perspective that I had seen it. So I decided to write about it. I start off, my book starts off with kind of biographical information on how and why I got into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it does touch upon the EMPIRE HIDEOUS. It's rather famous. If you read the book, and people who know me well, rather famous that I had a fascination for a very beautiful young woman who seemed to epitomize.
Who, by the way, is an ex-girlfriend of mine.
Yeah, well, little wonder that you would have been. Well, anyhow, she seemed to epitomize all the qualities, not just the beauty and the style of a goth girl, but the manners and philosophy and personal qualities that I thought were just so admirable, so admirable, and so it was somewhat in pursuit of running into this beautiful creature again that led me to attend the various nightclubs where I thought I might encounter her. And I started going to the Loop Lounge.
You know what they call that now? Stalking.
I wasn't stalking because I had no intentions other than to get a glimpse of her, because I thought that the glimpse would kind of open my perceptions to what was going on in the goth scene that I was trying to penetrate. And
again, no pun intended.
No, certainly not. Certainly not. So in my quest, I was at the Loop Lounge, and a friend, I encountered a friend who wanted to know, what the hell are you doing here, Doc? They were all college kids and some goths and mostly just alternate types.
Now, mind you, people, he mentioned a place called the Loop Lounge. The Loop Lounge was a nightclub in the town of Passaic, New Jersey. It's one of the first nightclubs I ever went to when I turned 21 and started drinking. Go ahead.
That's right, and this was the scene in New Jersey to go to the Loop Lounge. So I thought maybe I would run into this beautiful creature, and instead, a friend of mine said to me, "Oh no, if you're looking for her, she doesn't go here to the Loop Lounge. She goes to the Pipeline."
Yeah, the Pipeline, which was a place that Empire Hideous played its first show.
Yeah, and
There's
the Pipeline.
So much connection between your book and your history in writing the book and what it's about, and my past.
I know.
So
we're sort of joined at the hip. And I just a word about the Pipeline. There has never been anything more authentic as a punk club than the Pipeline. Even CBGB's was relatively closer to mainstream music, Blondie and the Ramones and the Talking Heads and so on. The Pipeline was really hardcore punk. It was so authentic, and it was not consciously that way. It wasn't set up like, let's put a barbed wire on top of this fence that makes it look like, or how about we get some grease on the driveway to make it, or let's burn some lumber out in the ash can in front of the place. There was no effort to make it that way. It
just
was authentic. It just was.
But if I may interject here, there was another club in Newark, New Jersey, called the Dirt Club, run by a guy named Johnny Dirt, and that preceded the Pipeline. I never played there because by the time Empire Hideous got going, that club closed down and he moved to Las Vegas. But I just want you to know there was the Dirt Club that kind of preceded the Pipeline. But go ahead.
Yeah, I had no contact with the Dirt Club, and I guess it was probably closing down around the time I was delving into the scene. And so, at the Pipeline, I made it my business to invade the DJ's booth. I would climb up into the DJ's booth. There was Bobby Lisi was the DJ, and he was pleasant enough with me. I don't think he really wanted me up in the booth. But
of course he didn't.
No, but he accommodated it. He put up with it. And it was from the booth that I was able to get an overall view of the scene. An overall view of the people who came and went, and the dancing styles and the music, and I learned so much from Bobby and from eavesdropping on conversations he would have and watching him select the records that would be. And by the way, he was spinning on a turntable,
vinyl.
Really, really DJing in that sense. So I learned a lot. Even on at least one occasion. On a Saturday afternoon, I think the Bouncing Souls were playing there, and I was DJing the intermissions in between.
Wow!
From what I learned by looking over Bobby Lisi's shoulders.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, Bobby Lisi is a guy who used to be a DJ at the Pipeline when I first started out in music. He also ended up owning a record store in Montclair, New Jersey called. What the hell was it called, Doc? You remember?
Two-Tone.
No, that was where I worked.
Cafe Sounds.
Cafe Sounds. Cafe Sounds was the record store that Bobby Lisi owned, and right next to it was a punk rock boutique called Two-Tone, which, by the way, I worked at from 1990. Excuse me, Kat, please don't commit suicide. Come down. Two-Tone. I worked at from 1990 until somewhere in 93, and then I ceased to work there anymore. That particular store, by the way, was, I gotta say, it put punk rock on the map in New Jersey, because Two-Tone had two stores, one in Passaic, New Jersey, that was originally right next to a place called the Capitol Theater. I saw the Stray Cats there. I saw Psychedelic Furs there. I saw, oh goodness, many great bands play. Thompson Twins when I was in my new wave stage. Anywho, all I'm saying is that particular store, Two Tone, excuse me. Oh. Okay, sorry, that was Cricket. Two Tone was something that was very important to New Jersey for the punk scene. Now, as Doc mentioned, the store that opened up next to it was Bobby's record store,
Cafe Sounds.
Cafe Sounds. Continue, sir.
Well, where did you want me to go from there?
Well, you got into the scene from there, and I guess it just kind of progressed. Now, you like all different types of music in the alternative scene. You like the punk rock, you like the industrial music, you like the gothic rock, you like what else is there? There's so many different genres these days.
Yeah, for a while, I was very committed to industrial music. You know, my first visit to the Pipeline, I went with a friend, and the place was empty. It was only 10 o'clock. Nobody showed up there till 11:30 or 12. And so, but the music was playing, and there was a beautiful girl, punk girl with a mohawk, dancing in the darkness of the dance floor area. And there was music playing that the likes of which I had never, ever heard in my life.
Uh-oh.
It sounded to me, the rhythm section, the percussion, whatever you want to call it, the rhythm section, sounded like the workings of a Nazi weapons factory.
Okay.
And the vocals came across like some type of a death chamber, or maybe souls of the dead from in hell crying in pain and suffering. And it was so beautifully put together electronically. I was absolutely dumbstruck. I had never heard anything so beautiful in my life.
And I'm going to take a guess. I bet you I know who you're talking about.
So I walked up to the DJ. It was not Bobby Leese. He was somebody I've never seen before or since. And I said, "What are you playing? What is this?" And he says to me, "That's Skinny Puppy."
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself, what the hell does that mean?
What does that
I'm
mean?
I'm asking him for the name of a band, or that Skinny Puppy. Well, I didn't want to show my ignorance by continuing to ask, like, what does that mean? So I took that, and now I got in the car, and I was returning with my friend. Both of us had tinnitus like crazy. We couldn't hear each other speak. We had to read our own lips because our ears were destroyed by the decibel level at the Pipeline. But eventually he said to me, "Oh, yeah, no, that's Skinny Puppy. That's an industrial band."
Mm-hmm.
Now, the story gets intricate after that.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened was, I was too embarrassed to even think about finding Skinny Puppy or following up on it. Who am I going to ask about that? And what will people think of me if I go into a record store and I ask for Skinny Puppy? So I just kind of let it go. And a very unusual experience befell me. I was at at the home of a relative in their backyard having lunch, a barbecue, when a black cat stumbled to the picnic bench where we were eating. And I like cats, and I actually even had a cat at the time. And I thought, oh, what a sweet little thing, this cat. And my relative said to me, "Oh, stay away from that cat. That cat is sick." And, we had the police here, but of course, by the way, their property bordered on a large park, Echo Lake Park, in Mountainside, New Jersey. And they said, "Well, we had the police here recently. They had to shoot some raccoons for rabies."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that cat associated with those raccoons and with bats out there. So stay away from that cat. Well, anyhow, I picked up a piece of cold cuts that was on the table, and I extended it to the cat. Here you go. Have this. All right, here you go.
There you go.
And the cat lashed
Wow.
out and tore my hand open with its claw. And now I'm bleeding. So, you do the thing. You start sucking the wound like this. And my aunt goes, do you understand what I'm saying? That cat is sick. You better watch it.
What the hell are you
Oh,
doing?
she goes, I'm
Mr.
going to put some
Doctor?
she goes, I'm going to put some Bacitracin on your finger. And I thought to myself, rabies? She's talking about rabies, and she thinks he's going to cure it with Bacitracin on my finger. Holy shit! So I ran to the bathroom, and I'm scrubbing with soap and water and everything, thinking, well, is that going to prevent my getting rabies?
Yeah, like, what do you do now?
Make a long story short, well, I called the emergency room in her town, and they were no help.
And this is when you were a doctor still. I mean,
I was, yeah.
Okay.
So I said, well, I'll call animal control. I called animal control. I asked the operator for their number. I called animal control. And indeed, somebody came and captured the cat. They set a trap for it. They captured the cat, and they brought it for observation.
Meaning they kill it and they cut its head off.
A few days later, I got a call. And by the way, I was doing nothing now. I get a call that the cat died in captivity, which would be consistent with having had rabies.
Right.
So I dropped everything I was doing. I drove straight to the emergency room of my hospital. I explained the situation to my emergency room physician, and I said, you got to do something.
Right.
So she looked it up, and she said, I'm going to call an infectious disease specialist.
Okay.
She called an infectious disease specialist, and he told her, you're late now. You're supposed to get injections 1 to 3 days later. It's already 4 or 5 days.
Oh, my
Well,
goodness.
I would hit this guy hard, meaning me, with double doses, 1 in each buttock, 1 in the arm, and see if he has a wound. Irrigate it with the rabies immune globulin. She said the wound is already closed. It's sealed and dried as a scab.
Oh, my God.
So, anyhow, I got the first doses for rabies. I came back in 3 days, got another series of all these injections.
Right.
I could barely walk. My buttocks felt like they had a cannonball stuffed into them. And
no pun intended.
now, listen to this.
This is great.
I get word from the Trenton. We examined the cat's brain. The cat did not have rabies. But meanwhile, I want to tell you, I was sick, though. I was sick with whatever that cat had. It wasn't rabies, but that cat did inflict an illness upon me. Okay. And in those days when I was receiving the rabies shots, I felt terrible anyhow. Right. Maybe the shots were making me feel bad. I had an upset stomach. I was pale. My muscles, my bones all ached. My urine was turning pink. It was a bad experience.
I'll say.
When they told me the cat did not have rabies, I was so thrilled. I said to my son, John, your Empire Hideous fan, John, let's go to New York and celebrate. So we went to New York, and we went to movies, and we went for drinks, and I passed by a record store. And I thought, this is New York. The guy won't know me, and I don't have to be ashamed. Let's go in and ask the guy,
right? Do
you have any records by, if you don't mind my saying, Skinny Puppy? So the guy goes, it's right there in there. It's over there where the rock music is. What are you looking for? And I thought, wow, it's that simple. Well, I went to this. I went to the the section alphabetically, S for Skinny Puppy. And what do I find? A record that says rabies.
Right.
It was just,
the irony.
The irony. There are no coincidences. Everything that happens that seems to be a coincidence is because both things were leading from the same cause.
Wow.
Well,
and that is a great album too. In fact, that is my favorite Skinny Puppy
my God,
album.
Yes.
Of all
and
time.
I listened to that. I studied the lyrics, and I listened to it again. I still listen to it to this day.
It's a great album. How can you not?
It's a great album.
Warlock. It's great.
And I was so nervous about, because Skinny Puppy was frequently breaking up and ending their association with each other. I felt it was important for me to broaden my knowledge of industrial music just in case Skinny Puppy would go out of existence.
Right.
And they did go out and they came back in and they went out again and they
Like
came
every
back in.
band.
So I started to like other industrial bands like Frontline Assembly and Front 242 and,
Right.
Ministry.
Right.
And of course, 9-Inch Nails.
Right.
Because 9-Inch Nails was making the crossover into mainstream at that time.
Right.
By way of Lollapalooza events that were, toured the country, but would make a touchdown in New Jersey, and I would attend the Lollapalooza events.
Yeah.
And
So,
ran into Butthole Surfers and 9-Inch Nails and others of that type, and that further deepened my involvement with the gothic, punk, and industrial music scene.
Okay, so having said that, now just hold your thought for a second before we go any further. I do want to mention to everybody who has been to New York City and has been to St. Mark's Place. Those of you who remember the days of the Jaffa Cafe, okay, you remember the painting that used to be on the wall, Jaffa Cafe, the big picture of the chick with the hat on, okay? I just wanted to point out that Dr. John was an associate artist that helped paint that image on the wall with a guy by the name of Federico Castelluccio, who was also an actor and was featured on The Sopranos as the hitman, Furio, the very tough, mean hitman from Italy. That's what I wanted to bring up. So Federico knew Dr. John and vice versa. When Federico got the job to commission the painting, he asked Dr. John to help him. I had to bring that up because anybody who knows New York City, who knows St. Mark's Place, knows the Jaffa Cafe and the painting that was on the wall. So I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. Now, back to the interview. So here we are. You've now,
Myke, for a moment, I think I can bring that painting of Federico and I painting Jaffa. I think I can bring it in front of the screen now, if you want. It'll just take a moment.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. All right, folks. So what you're looking at right here is a painting that Dr. John did of St. Mark's Place, of the painting that he did with Federico Castelluccio of Jaffa Cafe on the wall. Now, you'll also notice there's a couple of people down in the front. One of them is, I believe, me.
Yes, it is.
and that would be the guy with the hat. There's also an image of a guy who's a very good friend of mine by the name of Mark Steiner from a band called, what the hell's this band called? Mark Steiner and Its Problems. And then I think who's on the left? Margot?
Yeah.
Wow. And I think there's somebody else there who I don't know, right?
Well, there's me.
Where are you? Oh, I see.
Right next to you.
Yes. And then isn't Marjana in there somewhere?
Oh, you know what? Yeah, and Madam X. They're in the background. They're up in the alleyway there.
Okay, all right. So yeah, there's a few people that I know. As I've said, Doc and I go way back, so I know a lot about his personal life and some of the things that he adds into his paintings. So that's the painting. And again, the painting that you just saw with the image of the Jaffa Cafe on the wall, that was the painting I was initially talking about. Doc did the painting of the cafe on St. Mark's Place with a few people. That's just a sample of the work that he does. Now, having said, and thank you for sharing that with the audience. I greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to show it off.
Of course. Now, so here we are. You've now become very much engulfed in alternative music, underground music. You hook up with me as a friend. You get to see more things as you hang out with the band and go to clubs and see how I handle things with setting up shows, setting up gigs, and so forth. So now we're at a point here where you become, even though you still had a profession as a doctor, you have a what would you call it? Like a superhero alternative
Yeah, alternate
alternate ID, yeah, an
identity.
alternate ID, yes. Um, I remember you telling me stories of how you would do operations, and in the operating room, you would play music, everything from Skinny Puppy to Nine Inch Nails to Empire Hideous.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And boy, was it well received. I mean, the my assistants and the nurses and all were always happy. Oh yeah, they looked forward to my operations when I would. And if I didn't play, if I didn't bring a tape in those days, you'd bring a tape,
Good old
maybe
days.
maybe a CD,
Maybe.
but usually bring a tape. If I didn't bring a tape to the operation, there was disappointment among the nurses and the surgical
So
assistants.
how did they see you? I mean, you must have been one of the only doctors I've ever met or know that would play alternative music. Like, I mean, and I when I say alternative music, I'm not talking about the
Right.
B-52s. I'm not talking
No.
about like the Red
Right.
Hot Chili Peppers. I'm
No,
talking about
really.
fucking
Yeah. Radical.
Ministry. Yeah, Ministry, Front 242, Sisters of Mercy, that sort of thing. So, how did people, even though you're saying they liked being in the room with you and working with you, how did they perceive you? Well, you must have not been the typical average conservative looking
Yeah.
guy.
Well, you know what? Yeah. Would that God would give us the gift to see ourselves as others see us. I don't know how they saw me. I don't know. Obviously, uh, they, I was taken as a different type of
Right.
person, obviously, but I don't know how far it went. Uh, it didn't seem to affect my practice. I had, loyal patients coming back all the time and or referring their family members who needed orthopedic
Well,
care.
you
Uh,
certainly didn't try to how should I say this? You didn't impose on them what you were into. You still kept your professionalism as a doctor. I mean,
that's
I had
right.
been to your office on many occasions when you were working, and I know you worked and you dressed for the occasion, but at the same time, you could dash into a room, rip off your clothes, put on an Empire Hideous t-shirt and some black clothes, and you were out the door to a club. So I know there was that alternative side to you.
Crazy.
Uh,
But
but
all I
ultimately,
can say is
people accepted you for who you were.
I don't know what people said behind my back, but but I never
Couldn't it be worse than what they say
I
about
never
me?
experienced. No one ever confronted me about it. No one ever confronted me and said, you're a disgrace to the profession, or I don't know what people said behind my back, but to my face, everybody was very fascinated by my delving into a subculture that was very far removed from their everyday
Now,
experience.
now,
And, they found it interesting. Most people, most of the physicians and all thought it was an interesting
unique.
aspect of my
Yeah.
personality. That's all.
So I could tell you
I'm sure
folks,
some thought it was, that I was a jerk. I'm
I
sure.
could tell you folks, Doc would tell me stories. He's like, so I'm doing this surgery today on a guy who had a broken femur. And I'm blasting your CD on the radio in the operating room. And he would tell me stories like this. And I just absolutely loved it. And it was times like that when Doc would tell me these fascinating, pardon me, these fascinating stories of his of his day in the operating room playing my music, and I was so honored that a doctor,
Oh,
a
sure. You
surgeon
should be.
would be playing my
W-
music in the operating room. I was just blown away by that.
People liked to hear it. So, yeah, you should be pleased with yourself for it. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, so about the book. So the book, when did the book come out? I know it came out last year. What was the month?
Yeah, in 23. Yeah,
Do you remember
2023,
the
early
month?
2023.
It's been
So it's still basically a new book. It's not a year out
okay.
yet,
So
right? And
when Doc started writing the book, he had asked me for some input and to do a little bit of editing for him, which I did.
Yeah, and proofreading.
I did
And
some proofreading, and I
yeah.
was very, very critical with Doc. I was like, "That's wrong. You can't
Yeah.
say that."
That was very well received, very appreciated,
But
of
the good thing
course.
about with Doc and I, we have such a great relationship as friends after all these decades of knowing each other that he understood I wasn't being harshly critical of him. I was trying to help him. So
No,
I do
no,
have
very constructive.
exactly
Very
constructive
constructive,
criticism. So
yeah.
I do have a thank you a thank you note in the book on having helped him with proofreading and so on.
Yeah, and the acknowledgments,
But right
yeah.
now we're going to take a hard break, and so stick around, and we shall return to Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous and my guest, Dr. John. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested in any of the merchandise that I sell, you can go to MykeHideous.com, just like the name of our program here, Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous. If you go to MykeHideous.com, you can get my book, which is called King of an Empire to the Shoes of a Misfit. It is about my years as a performer and a musician, and covers a range from 1988 to 2014. It also talks about my short but very successful point in time when I sang for the famous punk rock band known as the Misfits from Lodi, New Jersey. And you can also get my t-shirts, my horrible artwork, horror design, blankets, t-shirts, throw pillows, girls' dresses, so on and so forth, as well as my music, downloadable CDs. What else? I don't even. Just go to the damn website and check it out. So yeah, that's what I got. You can, and the most recent thing is the book. Hopefully I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to have a whole bunch of new t-shirts up and ready to go for sale. And that's not just the music stuff from Empire Hideous, the band that I was in, but this whole other section of design of clothing that I have with my artwork designs on them, and I call it horrible artwork. And it's going to be all kinds of stuff like that, old, creepy stuff. In case anybody doesn't know my background, I kind of dabble in the occult, so all creepy, cool stuff like that. So yeah, folks, if you're interested in anything, go to MykeHideous.com. Click on the shop section and go down, and a couple other clicks and you're there. Thanks very much, guys. All right, folks, we are back. Thank you for sticking around with us. You're listening to Finding the Truth with me, Myke Hideous, your host, and my co-host, Professor Z, as well as our guest tonight, Dr. John. And we're going to ask Doc, considering the fact that he has a medical history, we're going to ask him a couple of questions about some things that we have just recently discovered online, and we want to get his take on it. So, on that note, I'm going to start by turning it over to Professor Z to begin with a description of what we've seen, read about, and then, of course, whatever question you want to ask Z is completely up to you. So, take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Myke. Well, just to quickly recap, as we covered in a previous episode, there seems to be at least some new pathologies that are being found by morticians. And, this is really getting scientific. We're completely off the subject, obviously, of rock and roll and punk. And this is where we're talking about, just from a medical standpoint, there seems to be a concern amongst those, especially in the embalming and the funeral business, where they're discovering these sort of white clots in the circulatory system of people when they pass away. And the immediate, conjecture seems to be that this is a new pathology that's only shown up in since 2020 or 2021, more specifically. And I think Doc, we've shared with you some information about this stuff. So honestly, we just wanted to get some feedback from you as somebody who's at least in the medical profession, and what you may be thinking about this scenario, because it is certainly very concerning. The fact that, when I heard this, the fact that morticians and embalmers are seeing something they've never seen in their careers before, that seems like something that somebody should be talking about, like, more broadly, in the media somehow.
Right.
So I'll just leave it with that, and sort of get your impressions, Doc, on what you think, you know, what is going on here.
Well, first of all, we should be aware that what we call clots in common parlance. We're talking about the thrombus, THROMBUS, the thrombus.
Right.
Uh, the thrombus is a formation of solid from the liquid components of blood. Um, there are proteins that circulate in the blood, and platelets are actually little miniature uh, particles of cells like red blood cells, white blood cells. They're particles of cells. I say particles because they don't have a nucleus, so they're not really a cell per se, but they're made up of cytoplasm, and they have a cell membrane just like a cell, but they don't have a nucleus, and they're doomed. They only exist for a certain period of time and have to be replaced by a new generation of platelets every few days. Now, uh, the thrombus comes in two forms. There's a red thrombus, which is predominantly composed of red blood cells that get caught up in the uh, platelet and protein uh, mix that solidifies. And so that's a red thrombus. In other words, a lot of red blood cells are caught up in it, and it makes the thrombus red. And
And
that's what
and
we
just
see like a scab,
okay, all right. So
Professor.
that's like when you're healing from somebody, but it's not necessarily like a thrombosis. Is that a different scenario when you have a blood clot, say in your leg or something like that?
Well, yeah, a thrombus or thrombosis forms in response to something. Now, nature intended thrombus to form to stop you from bleeding to death. Nature intended thrombus to, if you get cut, that's got to stop at some point or you lose all your blood. So the wound, a wound, the tissues that are cut in when you get a wound and the skin and muscle get cut, they release certain factors that trigger these proteins, uh, these thrombogenic proteins, these proteins that uh, go from liquid to solid under the influence of the factors that are released by damaged tissue. Uh,
Okay.
if you're bleeding and you have a cut, the platelets also join in with the proteins that are circulating all the time to make a thrombus. And if you're bleeding a lot, it becomes a red thrombus because the red blood cells get caught up in it. Now that's the normal functioning of thrombus. Now, before I go into the abnormal thrombi that your morticians' autopsies have been revealing, I have to mention that the immune system, the immune system uh, is as everybody knows, is our way of recognizing foreign, mainly foreign proteins and attacking them. So if you get a foreign protein, like say pollen from a plant that's blooming, blossoming, into your nostrils, you inhale it, that protein is foreign to you, and your immune system reacts against it to break it down, to attack it, and to decompose it, to break the proteins down into particle matters. And if it doesn't succeed at that, it tells your body to start acting violently against it. And then you sneeze and your nose runs and your eyes get watery. And that's not really pleasant, it's an overreaction, but the immune system is like it's like a cannon to kill a mouse. It doesn't know where and when to stop the reaction. So
Interesting.
everybody knows. Uh, uh, Everybody knows that allergies to penicillin can be fatal. If you the first time you get it, you get a rash. The second time you get it, you die from anaphylactic shock. So what I'm going to tie into COVID and COVID vaccines is this: COVID is made of a virus, and the virus has uh, spikes on it. Everybody knows the diagram of it. It looks like a sphere, and it's got all these spikes sticking out. Those spikes, as well as the rest of the virus, made of protein. Made of protein. So if you get the disease COVID, just like if you get influenza or a strep throat, the proteins of the invading organism, whether it's a virus or bacteria, the proteins are recognized by your body as foreign, and you mount an assault on them, an attack on them.
Right.
The assault comes about because your body thinks that this is really dangerous and it's got to be cleared out of your system. So, immune globulins, those are proteins that circulate in the bloodstream, especially if they've seen this protein before. Immune globulins very avidly attach onto that protein, that foreign protein. Say it's the spike of a COVID virus or the cell wall of a streptococcus bacteria. It attacks on that, and then your white blood cells come along and they explode. They blow up and they let their enzymes
They
and
literally
acid
explode.
enzymes.
They literally
The
explode.
white blood cells come and they receive a signal from the immune system to pop open their cell membranes. Their cell membrane pops open and releases these little vesicles of harsh chemicals, acids and enzymes to dissolve and break down that protein and kill it. This is an unpleasant experience for you. That's where pus comes from. That's where the sneezing comes
I like
from.
pus.
That's where the chills, the shaking chills from having the flu, that comes from the release of all these factors that your immune system brings to the situation, brings to the location where it encounters foreign substance. Now, let's go to the COVID vaccine. The COVID vaccine tries to make us allergic to the COVID virus.
Right.
But they did not come up with, they said it would have taken 10 years to cultivate a COVID virus that was as benign and harmless enough that they could put it into you. You would learn to kill it. You would learn to be allergic to it, but you wouldn't get very sick from it. That's like the polio vaccines and stuff that we
Right.
get now.
The flu vaccines and so forth.
Yeah, you get a polio vaccine or a flu vaccine, and what they've given you is a very watered down, maybe even a killed virus that your immune system comes to recognize the foreign protein, attack it, and destroy it.
Right.
That didn't work for COVID. So what they did was they found a way to synthesize just the spike proteins. And as you may have noticed over the months and years of COVID, the virus kept changing its spikes, and that's why you'd have a different crop and a different vaccine would come out, because the COVID knew that it had to keep changing its spikes because you were learning, the human population receiving the COVID vaccines were learning to disassemble, to demolish those spikes.
Right.
How did
just
it work?
actually, if I could just
Yes,
put
please.
another point on this, is like, isn't the the general pathology of a virus is the fact that it's going to evolve. There's going to become generations of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But in this case, and that's where vaccines can lag because, of course, the current generation of whatever, virus is going around the population, if the vaccine doesn't apply to that, then it's literally not going to help.
You get the disease. So,
Right.
disclosure, disclosure here. I received the original vaccine and 3 boosters. I've been boosted. I've received 4 versions of the vaccine. I recently got and recovered from COVID.
Hmm.
Now, it only lasted like 3 days in me, and I guess I can credit some of the vaccinations that I underwent. That it was not a very bad illness. Although I did lose my sense of smell, and
Mhm.
and although that has come back, sort of, my smell is altered. My sense of smell is
Interesting.
altered. I don't
Right.
enjoy the smells that I used to enjoy. Ground coffee, lemon. So many smells that are delicious to us are not
Farts.
anymore to me delicious. They're not. I
Right.
don't. I drink. I'm a habitual coffee drinker, but I don't really appreciate the smell of ground coffee. I love citrus fruits, especially lemon and lime, but I no longer find them to be appealing. And even an orange or something doesn't have aside from the sweetness, it doesn't have any of the original appeal it had to me. And I'll
Wow.
tell
And
you
this is
something
this is
else.
since
This
your most.
began.
Mhm. Go ahead.
Yes, well, you were going to say, is this since I had COVID?
Right.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Especially after I lost smell completely, and then it came back in this distorted fashion. But I now remember having altered smell experiences back
Mhm.
when the first
Right.
vaccine was given to me back in 2021,
Wow.
and
Okay.
I didn't take much note of it at the time because I didn't attribute it. I didn't know to attribute it to the vaccine. But
Mhm.
and you know why I can tell, because I moved from my home in Totowa to a home in Wayne around that time. And when I moved to Wayne, that was when I got the first COVID vaccine. And it was at that time that I began wondering, does this house have a different smell? Because
Hmm.
there's something wrong with the way coffee smells to me. There's something wrong with the way the cat litter smells to me.
Wow.
Things like
Okay.
that. The cat food, the canned cat food smells different to me now. And but I didn't make any connection until I got COVID, lost my sense of smell completely, and when it came back after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, uh, I was again confronted with this altered smell sensation that I recognized as having originated with the first vaccine back in 2021. Now,
Wow.
let me get to the clots, because
Well, if I can ask just real quickly, how do you
yeah,
feel
please,
on at
please.
least the subject of, the vaccines versus natural immunity? Because I know when this thing first started happening, I got hit with it like, before the news started talking about COVID. And I was
Hmm.
definitely hit with a serious, illness that lasted 3 weeks. And I can only
Mm,
determine after the fact that it was most likely COVID in the first wave.
yeah,
So,
bad.
I felt from that point, especially given my age and other factors, that I really didn't need the vaccine because I know I just had it and therefore I should have natural immunity against this thing. So, how do you generally feel about that as a, in general,
Uh,
natural immunity?
yeah, I agree with that idea that if you were young and healthy, you probably should have avoided getting the vaccine. Uh,
They were
but
saying
that was a
that, but
hard sell for
they were
me.
they were saying that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but they were saying that from the very beginning that children, I think under the age of 10 or 8, didn't even need to be vaccinated, and now they're pushing it left and right.
Select researchers like Dr. Bhattacharya, what's his name? Uh, Bhattacharya. Yeah, they were saying no, you don't get the vaccine
Right.
if you're
A- a-
healthy and well. And
even the statistics were showing that out of all
yeah,
the people that did die, only I think it was only 20 kids in the entire it
oh
maybe
yeah,
even
it's
less. I think it might even been less died from COVID as opposed to hundreds of
the
thousands of
flu,
people.
yeah, as opposed to, but for me, they were emphasizing age as a, oh, everybody over 70, yeah, oh, it's fatal among them. It isn't really, but uh, alarmed as I was by the combination of my advanced age and what they were saying about COVID's selective fatality for elderly people, I jumped on the bandwagon and got all the vaccines that I could get. Now, I don't know if that'll ever wear off, and my sense of smell will ever come back. I don't know. I don't know. But I was,
Do you think not to interrupt you, but
mhm.
do you think that they're based on what we were initially discussing about these cells clogging these arteries? Do you think
Yes,
that there's a possibility that it's associated with again,
well,
this is purely speculative. We're trying to understand when based on this article that Z and I read, what's causing this? They seem
it
to
is
think
it
it's
it it is
possibly from the
speculative. It is speculative, but it makes sense. Thrombosis can be part of the body's overreaction, and it's inflammatory overreaction to an immune challenge. Thrombosis can occur. And in fact, the deaths that people suffered with COVID back in the early days before there was a vaccine and when they didn't know how to treat it, and when the vaccine advocates were preventing doctors from prescribing drugs that helped it, they were condemning the use of drugs that helped
like
fight off the virus
like
because they wanted
Right.
you to rely only on the vaccine.
right. What
And
Right.
was that? What was that one drug?
they
And, and,
Chlora.
and
hydroquin, yeah.
Yeah,
And there's
hydrochloroquine.
another
They
one.
condemned that too, but it worked.
Yeah, there was one that
yeah.
they said was a horse tranquilizer. Uh,
That
I
was the one
forget the
with
name of it too.
starts with an I, Invectrum or something. I
Yeah,
remember
ivermectin.
Joe
Ivermectin. That's
Ivermectin.
right.
Yeah, because Joe Rogan
Yeah.
got a hard time because he said he took it, and the media went nuts saying, "Oh, he took horse
Yes.
tranquilizers." But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's
But they were
literally a
full of you know
well-known
what.
drug. Yeah, and that's a
Yeah.
Yeah,
well-known
they've had it
drug
for
around the
years.
Of
world
course.
for saving
But
lives.
right. But the authoritarians wanted you to rely only on the vaccine, and I'm sure that it had to do with the profitability of making the whole world take these vaccines. Imagine if you owned a company that you were going to sell your product to every last man, woman, and child on the planet
Like
Earth.
8 billion of them.
Yeah. So that was the greed that motivated that, and those who were part of that conspiracy.
Now, hang
Those
on one
doctors.
second. Hold that thought 1 second. Just saying what you just said has sparked so much controversy over social media. There are things that you can and cannot say. And that's what blows my mind about this silencing of freedom of speech. Science knows no boundaries. Every little possible thing that you can pick out with science to understand whatever it is you're trying to understand should always be accepted. So I found it very difficult that they were stifling people such as yourself, doctors and other people who are in the profession and know about these topics, to stifle them and not let them get their opinions out. I felt was like Nazi Germany.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have what you heard me say a moment ago. I don't know if I would have been wise to say that while I was still practicing medicine, because doctors and pharmacists got into trouble, and pharmacists refused to fill doctors' prescriptions for fear of repercussions, uh, even though it's a common common sense thing for a doctor to write a prescription. Here, go to the drugstore and get this. I think it'll help you. Oh no, We can't do that. You're supposed to get vaccines. We're not supposed to use horse tranquilizer or what do they call hydrochloroquine? Aquarium cleaning
Yeah.
items. You know, they made up. They slandered. They slandered all the
All
best
kinds
things
of
for me.
stories they
Yeah.
gave out.
Well,
Right.
anyhow, let me say one thing. What I was afraid of when I was afraid that I might get COVID was what they called it was uh, a storm, an immune storm in
Right.
which clots would form all through your system, block your arteries and your heart and everything, and kill you. So apparently, the COVID produced a kind of immune reaction that was accompanied by the abnormal thrombus formations. Now, if the
Hmm.
COVID could do that, how about just the protein spikes? Just the
Hmm.
protein that comes from the spikes. Could that do that? Well, uh, in select cases, in individual cases, yes, it could. Fortunately, it didn't happen to me with the 4 vaccines I got, but someone else might have been, for some reason, more prone to the
Well,
abnormal thrombus formation
so
that came
here's
from the vaccine or from the COVID or from the virus
right.
itself.
Well, an interesting part of, and I shared with you Dr. John Campbell's videos links. I don't know if you got to watch some of them, but one of the interesting points he made early on in the whole COVID, lockdown and everything, was the fact that um, when you're giving the vaccine, it would be best, or it's preferable to do a oh gosh, I just lost the term, aspirate, so that you actually pull back on the needle a little bit, because the vaccine was supposed to be given intramuscular, not into the venous system.
A vessel,
So if
not
they
into the vessel.
aspirated, then they would make sure that it was into the muscle as opposed to into the bloodstream. And it seems like there's so many stories, especially nowadays, of sudden death and so forth, where I can only suspect that possibly, I mean, he also pointed out that apparently nurses in the United States are not instructed to aspirate when they give shots. So it's a big thing of Europe and most of the rest of the world, but not necessarily in the United States. And when I heard that, it just seemed like, so like, I don't know, 1 + 1 equals 2. If people are getting the vaccines directly into their venous systems, then that's not where it's supposed to be, and it could
What
be a
systems?
major
What
issue.
what what
Your
systems?
veins, into your veins and arteries.
I thought you
The
said
the, the
his.
vaccine was
That
supposed.
makes sense, Professor. What you're saying makes sense. Now, uh, yes, you're right. You want an intramuscular injection. That means you want this substance to be placed in between the fibers of muscle, and then very gradually your lymphatic system, your white blood cells, everything will then start to disperse that and disseminate it into the rest of your system gradually and slowly as it diffuses like an ink spot on a piece of absorbent paper. It will spread, and okay, then you get the benefit of it when it has spread to your whole system. And yes, your whole system now has an immunity to the COVID vaccine, rather to the COVID virus, at least the one that's around at that time. However, if by accident the tip of that needle is not in between muscle fibers, but has entered a vein, then when that vaccine gets squirted into you, it's getting squirted directly into your venous system, into your circulatory system, into your bloodstream. And just like, just like heroin users try so hard to get inside a vein so that they
Hmm.
could get that rush, the rush of all that provocative allergenic material suddenly hitting your whole circulatory system, I don't know what that might provoke in terms of uh, a, a disastrous reaction, a disastrous immune reaction response to it.
Right.
So, there are unknown factors that account for why one person gets COVID and gets sick and dies and needs a respirator, and 10,000 don't. 10,000
Right.
get COVID and they cough it off.
hmm
And one person gets the vaccine and dies on and one professional, a college basketball athlete, gets the COVID vaccine and dies in the middle of a game at
Soccer
Right.
age
players,
19 or 21.
soccer
Yep.
This,
players, baseball
yeah,
players, all kinds of
right.
There's
Some
people.
been so many
conditioned
stories.
athlete, right?
hmm
And yet tens of thousands of them get the COVID vaccine, and don't die, don't get clots, don't get thrombus formation.
Right.
A thrombus forms inside the blood of the circulatory system, right? That's where a thrombus forms, whether it's the white thrombus or the red thrombus. It forms inside a vessel, right? Well, it makes sense that directly injecting by accident the vaccine products directly into the circulatory system might result in thrombus formation inside that
Right.
circulatory system. Sure.
Right. Wow.
We aspirate
That's
when we
amazing.
give injections, we aspirate to make sure we're not sucking up blood. Sometimes, if you inject somebody on their chest, say on their chest wall, you aspirate to make sure you're not sucking air out of their lung, right?
Okay.
You make
Right.
sure you're not right. And yeah, likewise, if you don't want to directly inject into the circulatory system itself, into the fluid of the blood system, you aspirate before injecting. Now,
hmm
for an intramuscular injection like a shoulder or a buttock injection, I don't think people generally aspirate for that.
Right. And
Yeah,
so
I
that's
don't think
where, at
so.
least in the U.S., the majority of nurses probably didn't aspirate before they gave people the vaccines. So,
Right. So, 99 times out of 100, you were lucky.
right.
But the one time you might not be lucky, and it went into
hmm
the circulatory system.
So
So,
I
I
guess
mean,
just
this is all speculation, Professor,
right, of
but this is
course.
what I
Yeah,
think.
we're just trying to figure out, honestly, the truth, like, the show. But so going back to at least the video, which is really just very impressive to see these long tendrils of white clots that
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
When
embalmers are
they when
white
finding,
when
thrombus.
and
when
and
if
the
I may,
fact
just for a
that
second,
sure, go
when
ahead.
Professor Z showed me the images of these map-like structures that were being taken out of these veins, I was absolutely blown away because they're being found in these corpses, and they're not even.
Mhm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Z, but they're not even sure if it was the cause of death, but it very
No.
much seems like it could be.
It could be either the cause of death or it comes after the death has
Or
occurred.
after.
But
Postmortem.
the
Postmortem.
interesting thing is that generally when the autopsies are done, all the organs internally are removed from the cadaver and they're evaluated. And obviously nobody in doing autopsies has found these clots, but it's when it gets to the embalmers, when they have to try and insert their instruments to embalm the body, that they're finding these clots. And I find that really concerning. The fact that the actual people that are doing the autopsies aren't catching this stuff, but it
Well, yeah,
seems.
but I got to tell you,
Go ahead.
autopsies are rarely resorted to nowadays. When I was early in my medical training, someone died in the hospital. You say, "Gee, well, why did they die in the hospital? We're all the care." Well, let's do an autopsy on them. Nowadays, they don't. They,
Really?
if there are explanations, sufficient explanation, well, we don't have to do an autopsy on this person.
Wow.
We know that they had such and such. They had cancer, or
Right. It
they
has to be
had
unknown.
three prior heart attacks and all, and the family doesn't want them, and so when I was early in my training, the subspecialty of pathology, this medical specialty pathology, meant that you did autopsies every day. You did autopsies. If you were a
Wow.
pathologist at a hospital, you worked in the morgue doing autopsies on everybody who died in that hospital, or who the police brought you because someone died at home of unknown cause, or explanation required.
Right.
Nowadays, really, we rarely do autopsies. They do, maybe take the blood, maybe take a little chemistry, something like
Mhm.
that, little biopsies, or they just go by the record. Well, look, the guy had 3 prior heart attacks, and he was,
Right.
It's all
and
statistic.
so we
But
don't have to autopsy. We know what he died of.
right.
His
But
medical
still,
doctor signed off on it, saying an autopsy isn't necessary because he had COVID and he had pneumonia from COVID, and that's it.
right.
So they're
Well,
not, now when they get to the mortician, that's the first time anybody looks inside and says, "What the hell is this?"
right. Which is still great, amazingly concerning. I mean, it's just amazing what they're
Yeah,
pulling out of the human bodies, and
I
the
could
fact that they say
understand.
that they
Yeah,
have never seen it before 2020. Around 2021 is when, and
yeah.
morticians started seeing these things,
Well, yeah.
and
So
you
that
know,
one would think that there's a connection with
yes.
what happened in 2020.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. So, I mean, it's something that hopefully they're going to investigate further and try and clear up. I guess one other question just for you, Doc, real quickly, is part of what Dr. John Campbell has been really good in reporting was the fact that vitamin
Excuse me
D
one
is in.
second. Excuse me.
Sure,
Wasn't
go
it
ahead.
Dr. David Campbell?
No, John Campbell.
It was John Campbell.
It is John Campbell. Yes.
I could have swore it was David Campbell, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You're thinking of someone else. In either case,
Glenn
he's
Campbell.
pointed. He, there you go. He's pointed out clearly how vitamin D is really important to supporting the immune system, and he's actually made the point that if the powers that be had actually advised people to take vitamin D, that could have saved more lives necessarily than taking the vaccine or doing nothing. But vitamin D is something that apparently, a huge percentage of the population is deficient in. And, from what he's talked to and other researchers and so forth, he pointed out that vitamin D, you can take extreme amounts of vitamin D and there's no negative effects, but it is very positive for supporting your immune system. So do
This
you
is
have an
all
opinion in
very,
this area?
very true. Very true. Yep,
Oh, okay.
absolutely. I take mega doses of vitamin D and have done so since the first announced coming of the COVID pandemic.
I take
I take
vitamin
mega
D.
doses, and I take mega doses every day.
I
I
take
take
vitamin D
10
every
times.
day. I take beetroot. I take vitamin C. For a while, I was even taking some zinc, but also echinacea, garlic, lysine,
Well, we know you take garlic, Mike.
plenty of it too. I love garlic,
he was
both
he was born
natural,
with
Anybody who's
garlic.
ever
both natural and pill form. Garlic is I eat a lot of garlic and a lot of onions because it's a really good antioxidant. But yeah, again, I'm sorry, you guys were saying.
Well,
I was friendly with a young man, an orthopedic surgeon, who was working with the New York Giants, and this is long before COVID. This is back in 2015 or something like that. He was working with the New York Giants, and they decided to assay their vitamin D levels. And these are guys who eat like horses, and they're out on the field in the sun all the time, or when it's sunny, anyhow. And they found that like 90% of them were deficient in vitamin D. And
Wow.
that's when he was an orthopedic surgeon. He said to me, if they're deficient in vitamin D, what about the general population? So I was at that time running a clinic at St. Joe's for orthopedic patients, and we started doing assays of their vitamin D. And yeah, the poor people in the ghetto and the projects in Patterson and all, they were all deficient in vitamin D, 100%,
right,
not 50%. And so, yes, when this virus ran rampant through the population, uh, it really selected for people who were deficient in vitamin D. And by the way, historically speaking, the scourges of tuberculosis that killed so many people in the 19th century in the
Mm-hmm.
big cities of Paris and Berlin and London and New York. They were those epidemics of tuberculosis were undoubtedly um, facilitated by deficiencies of vitamin D. And in fact, I used to think it amusing that in this deadly disease, and tuberculosis can be a very deadly disease. It's in the same family as, I mean, it's in the same category, same ballpark as cancer. In the
Right.
19th century, what did they used to do? They would send you to the mountains and you'd go to a spa and you'd sit around in a wheelchair with a blanket on your lap and you'd sit outdoors on the veranda of uh, the spa that you went to. And lo and behold, they got better. Well, sure,
Or you're sitting
because
outside.
up in the mountains and in that air, the sunlight was hitting them and the sunlight was giving them vitamin D.
Amazing.
And
Wow.
yes, indeed, miraculously, long before the invention or creation of any drugs for tuberculosis, the sun and fresh air in the mountains therapy was working. And if you hear about, famous writers or actors or actresses or from the 19th century who oh, you had tuberculosis, but then they recovered. And well, you know what? They recovered. They had the money to go to a spa up in the mountains and be exposed to
Yeah, right.
sunlight
Yep.
and vitamin D.
As a matter
And
of
Right.
vitamin
fact,
D.
I
That's
remember a
amazing.
story.
Wow.
I remember a story you were telling me about World War One, where the American soldiers were getting the Spanish flu, and I think you said they were eventually losing it on the battlefield because they were exposed to sunlight. Is that true? Is that how
Yeah,
you told
but
me?
right, and in those transport ships carrying them across the Atlantic, further and further from the sunlight, no exposure to sun. Yeah, the flu would run rampant through the troops, but then when they got out in the field, the vitamin D, yeah, that they were subjected to, rather the vitamin D that they got because they were subjected to sunlight, yeah, would reverse it, and vitamin D would enable them to fight off the Spanish flu and things as serious as tuberculosis.
That was
So,
terrible. That was terrible. In
yeah.
any event, Professor, are you good with those questions? Has Doc answered the questions that you were
Of
asking?
course, Doc,
All
it's
right.
great getting your perspective on this, especially, obviously that you are from the medical profession, and this is not necessarily new for you. You've been dealing with,
Yeah, and it's just
illnesses and
it's
pathologies and the
just a
whole thing for
perspective.
years. Right,
Yeah, it's just
exactly.
a perspective. It's not authoritative. I'm not a virus specialist or an immune specialist, but I know the general principles of how how diseases and resistance or immunity
Right.
work.
And
Well, and that's
not only that,
important. I
like
mean,
Professor Z, like us, Dr. John is well. He's exposed to everything that's going on. He knows what's going on. Him and I have conversations with each other, just like you and I, Professor. He is he's a logical thinking man. He's a man of who obviously being a doctor, a man of facts. And when I spoke to him about not only the virus but the vaccine, I knew that I was getting an honest answer from a man who was in the medical profession. He's not going to lie to me. He's known me all these years. He knows my history. So that's how I knew I could get an answer that I about everything that was going on that I truly and firmly believed in. So
it
thank you
was
for
an
that, Doc.
informed answer, and I can
Yeah,
appreciate that.
Well,
And
good.
it's
honestly,
logic.
Doc, yeah, exactly. And logic has been a great part of my entire life. But honestly, Doctor, I want to say again, like, I really do appreciate your perspective because,
Absolutely.
interesting enough, I'm sort of the individual where I'm using both sides of my brain. Where I have an artist side where I'm creative and I try and work on my creativity, but there's the intellectual side where I am constantly focused on honestly understanding what's going on in this world and exactly what is the truth is. So
There you
I
go.
can appreciate, Doc, that you have that both sides of your brain is fully active, I would have to say.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right. So on that note, um, we're going to wrap it up here. Are we good to wrap it up there, Professor?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to just jump into
Yeah.
I guess a thank you and so forth? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I have a couple pages I'm going to read. No, I'm kidding.
Sure.
So I would like to say to everyone, thank you very much for listening to Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous. That would be me, your host, as well as Professor Z, my co-host, as well as our guest, Dr. John, an amazing artist, an established, well-talented author, and a journalist, a retired surgeon, and a dedicated supporter of my artistic and musical efforts, as well as who is also let me start that again, who is also my dear friend, whom I can truly and firmly trust when it comes to getting answers about things, and a person who I define as a true friend. So thank you, Doc.
Thank
I
you.
sincerely
Thank
appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on our show to give us your perspectives on not only your personal life but your art and your book on this podcast. So thank you very much with that. And for all of you out there, for all of our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this. Dr. John is a very intelligent man who's definitely been around the block and understands things that conversations that we can have that really open up my mind, at least.
I've been honored to take part in it.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to get Dr. John's book, you can get this book, Life in the New Dark Age. Can you see it? Life in the New Dark Age.
We can see it, but we can't hear you.
Okay. Sorry. You can get the book, Life in the New Dark Age, on Amazon or borderbooks.com.
Barnes and Noble.
BarnesandNoble.com. You can also see his artwork as well as some of the articles that he's written over the years at his website, which, by the way, Professor Z will post that on the podcast so you can see it. But it's drjohn.com, and it's doctor with a K, DOKTOR.
JOHN.
Right. Well, all right. So, yeah, we'll have the site posted. I want to thank Professor Z for all his hard work on Finding the Truth with Myke Hideous to make this show happen. Thank you very much, Professor.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Doc. Again, thank you, Doc.
Credit where it's due.
And thanks to everyone who has tuned in to listen to this variety show, as we now call it. Please like and like and describe. Please like and subscribe, as well as share our show with other people so that hopefully we can make the show grow to a greater level and provide our listeners with more subject matter. Please feel free as well to write us on the YouTube page primarily and tell us, tell me or Professor Z how you like the show, if you dislike it, or what you'd like to hear from us, or what you'd like us to do on the show. Don't forget to check out MykeHideous.com and don't forget, it's Myke, MYKE, hideous.com. You can get my book, King of an Empire to the Shoes of a Misfit, as well as new t-shirts that I've been posting that are out, as well as my CDs, both downloadable and actual CDs. So there you go, folks. I think I've covered just about everything. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Thanks again, Doc, for coming on. You've definitely enlightened us with so much information.
Thank you, Doc.
Thanks for inviting
definitely
me.
appreciate having you on.
Thank you for inviting me.
We hope to have you on again, sometime soon, just to go over whatever's new in the world. But definitely thank you for being part of the show.
So thank you, folks. Thanks for listening to Finding the Truth with me, Myke Hideous. Good night, everyone. Have a nice night.